Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes.
What happens when one of comedy's most legendary icons walks onto a talk show, expecting a friendly promotional interview, only to find himself caught in the crosshairs of a host, determined to take him down? When Eddie Murphy stepped onto the View set that Tuesday morning, the man whose comedic genius had defined generations, whose films had grossed billions, whose influence had shaped the entire landscape of American comedy. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush orchestrated by someone who'd confused moral superiority with cruelty. This wasn't going to be some minor disagreement about social issues or a spirited debate about comedy's boundaries. This was going to be a calculated attack disguised as accountability, a public execution attempt dressed up as journalism, and the most spectacular backfire in daytime television history. As Eddie Murphy reminded Joy Behar and millions watching that legends don't apologize for being legendary, that comedy doesn't answer to self-appointed moral police, and that some people you absolutely do not want to pick a fight with because they've survived 4 decades in entertainment by knowing exactly how to handle bullies. What you're about to witness is how one host's attempt to virtue signal turned into her own public humiliation, how a comedian's legendary status was earned, not just through laughs, but through the spine to defend his craft, and how sometimes the most devastating response to an attack is simply refusing to play the victim. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the View's Manhattan studio, that familiar space where hot topics dominated conversations and celebrity guests mixed with political debates. The set gleamed under professional lighting, the distinctive curved desk where the host sat, the comfortable guest chairs positioned for optimal camera angles, the live studio audience filing in with that buzzing energy that comes from being part of daytime television's most watched talk show. Eddie Murphy's car pulled up to the studio entrance at 9:15 a.m., 45 minutes before his scheduled segment. At 62 years old, Eddie moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this routine thousands of times. The promotional interviews, the talk show appearances, the questions about his latest project. He emerged, wearing a sharp charcoal suit that looked both elegant and comfortable, his smile genuine as he waved to a few fans who'd gathered outside hoping for a glimpse. "Mr. Murphy, such an honor to have you here," the production coordinator gushed, practically vibrating with excitement at escorting one of comedy's true legends. "The whole team has been looking forward to this all week." "Happy to be here," Eddie replied warmly, his voice carrying that distinctive timbre that had become one of the most recognizable sounds in entertainment. "Should be fun talking about the new project." In the green room, makeup artists worked with reverent efficiency, their hands steady despite the thrill of working on such an icon. Eddie chatted easily about his latest film, a comedy drama that was generating serious awards, Buzz sharing stories from set, talking about his co-stars with genuine affection, demonstrating the warmth and charisma that had made him beloved across generations. But in another part of the studio, Joy Behar sat reviewing her notes with an expression that suggested she had very different plans for this interview. Over the years, Joy had developed a reputation for asking tough questions, though critics argued she'd long since crossed the line from journalism into something more like prosecutorial attack. She seemed to take particular pleasure in trying to catch celebrities off guard, in creating uncomfortable moments that she could frame as holding people accountable. And this morning, Joy Behar had decided that Eddie Murphy needed to be held accountable. "You know, Eddie's early comedy had some controversial material," Joy said to her producers, her tone suggesting she was already crafting her attack strategy. "Stuff that wouldn't fly today. I think we need to address that." One of the younger producers looked uncomfortable. "Maybe we should focus on his new work? He's here to promote the film." "That's exactly why we need to ask the hard questions," Joy cut her off, her self-righteousness palpable. "When else are we going to get the chance?" What Joy Behar didn't understand, what she was about to learn in the most public way possible, was that Eddie Murphy hadn't survived 4 decades in one of entertainment's most brutal industries by being someone who could be pushed around. He'd faced critics, haters, racist attacks, industry politics, and every attempt to tear him down. And he'd emerged from all of it, not just intact, but legendary. The show's opening proceeded normally. The hosts discussed their hot topics: politics, celebrity news, the usual mix of commentary and debate. Then came the transition to Eddie's segment, and the energy in the studio shifted as one of entertainment's true icons prepared to join them. Coming up next, Whoopi Goldberg said to camera, her voice carrying genuine warmth, "We have the legendary Eddie Murphy here to talk about his incredible new film. This is going to be good, people. Stay with us." As they cut to commercial, Eddie stood backstage, breathing steadily, off that familiar pre-interview energy settling over him. This was routine. Talk about the film, share some funny stories, connect with the audience, move on to the next interview. Easy, comfortable. Something he could do in his sleep. But nothing about the next 30 minutes would be easy. The commercial break ended. The cameras went live. Eddie walked onto the set with his characteristic smile and swagger, that natural charisma that had made him a star, filling the studio instantly. The audience erupted in genuine enthusiasm, standing, cheering, applauding for someone who'd given them decades of laughter. "Eddie Murphy, everybody," Whoopi announced, standing to embrace him warmly. The affection between them was real. They'd known each other for years, had crossed paths countless times, shared genuine mutual respect. Eddie made his way down the panel, greeting each host in turn. Sarah Haynes practically bounced with excitement. Sunny Hostin offered a warm handshake and genuine smile. And then there was Joy Behar, sitting with that particular expression, the one her colleagues had learned to recognize, the one that meant she was loading up for something. Joy remained seated while the others had stood, a small power play. Her smile was present but cold, assessing rather than welcoming. "Eddie," she said, extending her hand without rising. "Thanks for coming." "Joy," Eddie replied pleasantly, taking her hand, noting its coldness but choosing graciousness. He settled into the guest chair with easy confidence, crossed his legs comfortably, and looked around at the panel with open, friendly expectation. Little did he know that Joy Behar had been planning this ambush for days. The first 10 minutes proceeded smoothly. Whoopi led the conversation with her characteristic warmth, asking about Eddie's new film, his creative process, what had drawn him to the project. Eddie responded with his natural charm, sharing entertaining stories from set, making the audience laugh with perfectly timed anecdotes, showcasing exactly why he was considered one of the greatest entertainers alive. "You know, after all these years in the business, I still get excited about new projects," Eddie said, his eyes lighting up authentically. "There's something magical about bringing characters to life, about hopefully making people laugh or think or feel something they didn't expect." Sarah Haynes nodded enthusiastically. "That passion really comes through in your work. You've managed to stay relevant across so many different generations of fans. How do you do that?" "I think real comedy is universal," Eddie responded thoughtfully. "People need to laugh, especially in times like these. If I can provide a little escape, a moment of joy, then I'm doing my job right." The audience applauded warmly. This was exactly the kind of uplifting conversation morning television excelled at: inspiring, entertaining, connecting. But Joy Behar had been unusually quiet during this opening portion, sitting back in her chair with that particular expression her colleagues knew meant trouble. She'd been waiting, calculating, preparing to strike. "Speaking of comedy, Eddie," Joy suddenly interrupted, her tone shifting noticeably from the warm atmosphere that had been established. Don't you think some of your earlier material might be considered problematic by today's standards? The change in energy was immediate and unmistakable. Eddie's smile faltered slightly as he processed the unexpected pivot. The other hosts exchanged glances, Whoopi's expression showing concern, Sarah looking uncomfortable. They'd seen Joy do this before, watched her turn perfectly pleasant interviews into confrontations, but attacking Eddie Murphy seemed like a bridge too far. "I'm sorry. What do you mean exactly?" Eddie asked, maintaining his composure but clearly caught off guard by the aggressive shift. Joy pressed on, seeming to relish the uncomfortable moment she'd created. "Well, there are jokes in your old stand-up routines, raw, delirious, that some people might find offensive by modern standards. Don't you think you owe your fans an apology for that kind of content?" The studio went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of anticipation, but the tense quiet of people recognizing that something had gone wrong, that the usual script was being violated. "Joy," Whoopi interjected gently, trying to redirect before this escalated, "maybe we should focus on Eddie's current work." "No, I think this is important to address," Joy cut her off, emboldened rather than deterred. "In this climate of accountability, shouldn't public figures take responsibility for their past mistakes?" Eddie straightened in his chair, his expression hardening as he realized this wasn't going to be the friendly promotional interview he'd signed up for. His eyes narrowed slightly. Anyone who knew him would recognize this as his warning sign. "Mistakes?" Eddie's voice remained controlled, but everyone could hear the steel beneath. "Hold on a minute, Joy. Let's be very clear about something here. I've been doing comedy for over 40 years, and I've always pushed boundaries. That's what comedians do. That's what comedy is. But at whose expense?" Joy shot back, her voice rising with self-righteous energy. "Some of those boundaries you pushed hurt people. Some of those jokes caused real harm. Comedy has always been about examining society, including its flaws and contradictions," Eddie replied, his voice steady but with an underlying edge that suggested his patience was beginning to wear thin. "If we start censoring art retroactively, based on evolving social standards, where does that end? Do we burn all the old books? Destroy all the old films?" Joy leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk, clearly feeling like she had Eddie on the defensive, like her trap was working. "So you're saying you have no regrets about any of your past material? No second thoughts about jokes that targeted marginalized communities?" "I'm saying that I'm proud of my body of work," Eddie responded firmly, his voice gaining power. "I've grown as a person and as a performer over the decades, just like everyone else. But I'm not going to sit here and apologize for making people laugh, for being part of comedy history, for material that was groundbreaking at the time, and brought joy to millions of people." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Audience members shifted uncomfortably. The other hosts were clearly struggling with how to handle the increasingly hostile dynamic Joy had created. "That's a very convenient way to avoid accountability," Joy said, with barely concealed contempt, her mask slipping completely now, revealing the attack this had always been designed to be. Eddie's jaw tightened visibly. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but carried the weight of decades of dealing with exactly this kind of attack. "Convenient?" He leaned forward, his intensity laser-focused now. "You think it's convenient to have someone ambush me on what was supposed to be a friendly interview? You think it's convenient to have my entire career, 40 years of work, of craft, of bringing joy to hundreds of millions of people reduced to whatever talking points you decided to prepare before I walked in here? I'm just asking the questions that need to be asked," Joy replied defensively, though her tone suggested she was enjoying the confrontation far more than someone genuinely interested in accountability would. "No," Eddie said, his voice rising for the first time, real anger breaking through his professional control. "You're not asking questions. You're making accusations and demanding apologies for comedy that was created in a different era, by a different person, in a different world. Do you apply this same standard to every comedian who's ever pushed boundaries? Or just the one sitting in front of you right now? The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable, Sarah attempting to jump in with a peacemaking comment, but Eddie wasn't finished, not even close. Let me ask you something, Joy, he continued, turning to face her directly, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. Have you ever said anything in your career that someone might find offensive? Have you ever made a joke that might not age well? Because if we're going to play this game of retroactive judgment, I think it should apply to everyone, don't you? Joy's face flushed red at Eddie's direct challenge, clearly not expecting him to turn the tables so effectively. The smugness that had been radiating from her moments before was rapidly being replaced by defensive anger. That's completely different, Joy stammered, obviously flustered by having her own standards applied to herself. I've never made the kind of material that you have. Really? Eddie's eyebrows rose skeptically. So you've never made a joke about anyone's appearance? Their background? Their beliefs? You've never said anything that might hurt someone's feelings or make them uncomfortable? Because I watch this show sometimes, Joy, and I've seen you tear into people with a viciousness that would make my old stand-up look like Sesame Street. Whoopi tried again to intervene, her discomfort visible. Maybe we should take a step back here and remember that we're all on the same team. No, Whoopi, Eddie said, his voice firm but not unkind when addressing her. We're not on the same team right now. Because teammates don't ambush each other on live television. Teammates don't prepare attack questions designed to humiliate. What Joy is doing right now isn't teamwork, it's a hit job. Joy's face had gone from red to pale, the reality of how badly this was backfiring beginning to dawn on her. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation about accountability. Accountability? Eddie's voice filled with bitter laughter. Joy, you wouldn't know accountability if it walked up and introduced itself. You've been sitting at this table for how many years? Saying whatever you want, attacking whoever you want, hiding behind, I'm just asking questions. Like that's some magical shield that protects you from the consequences of your behavior. The studio audience was completely riveted now, some nodding in agreement, others with mouths hanging open at watching this legend dismantle his attacker with surgical precision. Let me tell you what accountability actually looks like, Eddie continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that somehow carried more power than shouting. Accountability is owning your intentions. And your intention here wasn't to have an honest conversation about comedy's evolution or social responsibility. Your intention was to score cheap political points by attacking someone you thought would just sit there and take it. Joy tried to interrupt. That's not fair. Not fair? Eddie's voice exploded with fury, causing several people in the studio to visibly jump. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair to invite someone onto your show under false pretenses? Is it fair to ambush them with attack questions when they came to promote their work? Is it fair to demand apologies for art that brought joy to millions of people? He stood up suddenly, the movement so decisive and powerful that it shocked everyone in the studio. Joy actually recoiled in her chair, genuine fear flickering across her face as she realized she'd pushed one of entertainment's most powerful figures too far. You know what, Joy? Eddie said, his voice now dangerously quiet, in a way that felt more threatening than all the shouting. I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've dealt with critics, haters, racist attacks, people who wanted to tear me down for being too successful, too black, too funny, too much. But I have never, and I mean never, encountered someone with the sheer audacity to invite me onto their show just to ambush me with this kind of self-righteous garbage. Joy shifted uncomfortably in her seat, finally beginning to realize that she might have made a catastrophic mistake. Eddie, I think you're overreacting to some simple questions. Simple questions? Eddie's voice hit a crescendo that filled the entire studio. Simple questions? You call attacking my entire life's work simple questions? You call demanding that I apologize for making people laugh simple questions? Lady, you wouldn't know a simple question if it walked up and introduced itself to you personally. The producers were frantically gesturing from behind cameras, desperate to cut to commercial. But the confrontation was happening too fast, too intensely for anyone to intervene effectively. I was trying to have a meaningful conversation about accountability, Joy said weakly. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated in the face of Eddie's unleashed fury. Meaningful conversation? Eddie laughed, but it was harsh and bitter. Joy, you wouldn't recognize a meaningful conversation if it came with subtitles and a user manual. What you were trying to do was score cheap political points by attacking someone you thought would just sit there and take it because that's what celebrities are supposed to do, right? Just smile and apologize for existing? Whoopi was standing now too, clearly recognizing that the situation had moved far beyond anything normal hosting techniques could manage. Eddie, maybe we should all just calm down for a minute. No, Whoopi, Eddie said, turning to address her directly while maintaining his furious energy. I'm not calming down. I'm tired of calming down. I'm tired of pretending that this kind of behavior is acceptable. I'm tired of watching people like Joy turn every conversation into an opportunity to lecture and shame and virtue signal instead of actually engaging with ideas or celebrating art or having genuine human connection. He turned back to Joy, who now looked genuinely frightened by the intensity of his response, by the realization that she'd awakened something in him that wouldn't be put back to sleep. You want to talk about harm, Joy? Let's talk about the harm you've caused with this little stunt of yours. You've taken what should have been a positive conversation about creativity and art and cinema, and you've turned it into a toxic attack session. You've demonstrated to millions of viewers that genuine dialogue is impossible when one person comes in with a predetermined agenda to destroy the other person. I never tried to destroy you, Joy protested weakly. Really? Eddie's voice dripped with sarcasm. So what would you call what just happened here? What would you call spending 20 minutes attacking my character, my work, my integrity? What would you call demanding apologies for comedy that brought joy to millions of people, that inspired a generation of comedians, that broke barriers and pushed boundaries, and made people think differently about what comedy could be? Sarah made one last desperate attempt to salvage something. I think there might be some miscommunication happening here. No miscommunication, Sarah, Eddie said, his tone softening slightly when addressing her but remaining razor-sharp when he glanced back at Joy. This was very deliberate and very calculated. Joy knew exactly what she was doing when she prepared those questions. She knew exactly what kind of reaction she was hoping to provoke. The only miscalculation was thinking that I would just sit there and let her get away with it. Joy made one final attempt to regain control. I think you're being paranoid, Eddie. Not everything is a conspiracy against you. That comment proved to be the absolute worst thing she could have said. Eddie's eyes widened with a level of fury that seemed to surprise even himself. Paranoid? He roared, his voice filling the entire studio. Paranoid? Joy, you just spent 25 minutes systematically attacking everything I've built in my career, and you want to call me paranoid for noticing? You think gaslighting me is going to work here? You think I'm going to question my own perception of reality because you say so? The audience was completely silent now, riveted by the raw emotion pouring out of one of their beloved entertainers. This wasn't just a celebrity having a bad day. This was a master craftsman, defending his life's work against someone who had catastrophically underestimated both his intelligence and his backbone. This is exactly the problem with people like you, Joy, Eddie continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of 4 decades of experience in an industry that had tried countless times to tear him down. You think you can say whatever you want, attack whoever you want, and then when people respond with appropriate anger, you can just dismiss them as overreacting or paranoid or dramatic. You think your position at this table gives you the right to judge, to prosecute, to demand answers and apologies from anyone who sits in that chair. He paused, looking directly into the camera, addressing not just Joy but millions watching at home. Well, I've got news for you, that game doesn't work on me. I didn't survive 40 years in this business by letting people walk all over me. I didn't become a legend by apologizing for my art. And I'm damn sure not going to start now because someone who's never made a fraction of the impact I've made decided to play moral police on daytime television. Joy sat in stunned silence, clearly having no idea how to respond to the verbal hurricane that had been unleashed in response to her attempted gotcha journalism. You know what the real tragedy is here, Joy? Eddie said, his voice finally beginning to lower in volume but losing none of its intensity. You had the opportunity to have a genuine conversation with someone who spent 4 decades learning about comedy, about entertainment, about connecting with audiences across every demographic imaginable. You could have asked about the creative process, about the evolution of humor, about the responsibility that comes with making people laugh. He shook his head slowly, his disappointment palpable. Instead, you chose to turn this into a political attack session, because that's apparently the only way you know how to engage with the world anymore. Everything has to be about catching people, about exposing them, about tearing them down so you can feel morally superior for 5 minutes. Eddie looked directly into the camera one final time before delivering his devastating closing statement. And that, more than any joke I've ever told, more than any boundary I've ever pushed that is truly offensive, because you're not using your platform to enlighten or educate or entertain. You're using it to bully. And I don't do well with bullies. The studio remained in absolute silence for several long seconds, as the weight of Eddie's words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Finally, Whoopi cleared her throat, attempting to restore some semblance of normalcy. Well, this has certainly been an intense conversation, she said, though her voice betrayed how shaken she was. Eddie looked around the studio one final time, his anger cooling but his disappointment still clearly visible on his face. It didn't have to be, Whoopi, he said quietly. It really didn't have to be. And with that, Eddie Murphy removed his microphone, set it carefully on the coffee table, and walked off. The View set with his head held high, leaving behind a stunned audience, a group of shell-shocked hosts, and one thoroughly humiliated, Joy Behar, who had just learned the hard way that some legends earned their status not just through talent, but through the spine, to defend themselves when attacked. The cameras kept rolling because no one had thought to cut them off, capturing Joy's pale face, her shaking hands, her complete inability to form words, capturing Whoopi's expression of disappointment mixed with understanding, capturing an audience that erupted in applause not for the show, but for Eddie Murphy, for his refusal to be a victim, for his defense of his craft. As the studio finally cut to commercial, the producers rushed onto the set. Joy slumped in her chair, looking defeated, and somewhere outside the building, Eddie Murphy got into his car with a sense of satisfaction that came from standing up to a bully and winning decisively. Within minutes, clips from the confrontation flooded social media. But the response wasn't divided or controversial. It was overwhelming and unanimous. Eddie Murphy had just delivered a masterclass in standing up for yourself. And Joy Behar had learned that some people you absolutely do not attack because they've earned the right to defend themselves without apology. The legend had reminded everyone why he was legendary, and the attempted takedown had become the attacker's own destruction, broadcast live for millions to witness and remember.